And we're back. I'd like to say hello to everybody out there in internet land. Hi, Mommy. Today we're looking at the Great West and the Agricultural Revolution. And so we're going to do this in two videos because I'm sure I'm going to have lots of anecdotal stories that just pop in my head. And, well, you know how this works. So here we go. All right, so the stereotypes, right? Stereotypes out in the West, you've got the evil Indians out there that are raiding the trains and the Conestoga wagons, and then you've got the Mexicans who want Texas back. You know, they can have Texas. That doesn't bother me at all. You've got the Mormons who want to be left alone and with their state of desert out there. So stereotypes. We have the Indian wars. You've got, let's see, the Comanche versus the Apache. You've got the Chippewa versus the Cheyenne. You have the Sioux versus everybody. You've got the Dallas Cowboys and the Washington Redskins. I know you're sitting here thinking, how in the world did I get that picture to be just like that? I know it looks like it's real. I get it. But no, that is just my impressively... my impressive ability of Photoshop. You can hardly see that those are two different pictures, right? Okay. Moving on. The Indian Wars. I do want to say today that I'm going to be using the word Indian probably more than I'm saying Native American, simply because that was the language that's in a lot of these acts and these bills that were passed by the government. So I'm going to be interchanging those, just letting you know ahead of time. And so the Indian Wars. The government, the U.S. government, decided that, manifest destiny. The government, the white government, wants all the land from point A to point B, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and so, gosh, those evil Native Americans are in their way, and so manifest destiny. God wants the government to have this land, and so we got to get rid of the Indians. So how do you do that? Well, you ask them nicely, or you declare war on them, and ultimately, we know which way this is going to go. So in the early part of the wars, the Indians had the advantage in some ways. If you think about reloading times, right? The Native Americans who are using bows and arrows, how fast can you fire 5 arrows? I don't know. I can think about how fast Hollywood does it, and how fast they can reload arrows, right? And how fast can you reload a muzzle-loading gun? So you fire the gun, then you put it down, then you put the stuff in with the stuff, and you stamp it down, and then you load the thing. So the Native Americans had the advantage with regard to reload times. Well, until Samuel Colt came up with this bad boy, the 6-shooter, and there you go. And so then the government had a little bit of advantage over the Native Americans after that. Okay, so the government's coming out and sending the troops. There were groups of troops that were 100% African American, and so the Native Americans called the African American troops, they called them the Buffalo Soldiers. Here's a pretty famous picture of a group of Buffalo Soldiers, and I was looking at this and I thought, well, it kind of looks like a yearbook photo, and here's why I think that, because I've seen lots and lots of yearbooks and actually worked on some yearbooks before. And when you say, okay, everybody get together and form a little group, and the tall people in the back, and you always have that one guy, that one kid who has to lay down in the middle of the group at the very front because he's the coolest guy. You know who you are. That was never me, but you always have to have that one guy who lays down in front of the group and has to be the cool guy. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so yuck, massacres. A massacre is when one side is overwhelmingly more powerful than the other side, and so we have a couple of them going on here. The first one we're going to talk about is Sand Creek. The Sand Creek Massacre. We have Colonel J.M. Shivington of the U.S. Of the United States military, and he's going to come over the hill. He's being asked to talk to the Cheyenne Arapaho Indians, and he plans it so that all of the warriors, the Indian warriors, are actually out hunting, and when he shows up, all that's left in the little village is older people and women and children. and something goes wrong. There are reports out there that the Native Americans actually were flying, flags of truce, and at least one account says that the Native Americans were flying a United States flag, but it didn't matter to Chivington, and the story says that he attacked the camp and it ended up killing a lot. Killed over 400 Cheyenne Indians who were not at war with Chivington. And that was in 1864. 2 years later, a group of Native Americans are going to get revenge. A group of U.S. troops that are in Wyoming, and they're moving up into Montana on the Bozeman Trail. They're going to be ambushed and massacred themselves by a group of Native Americans in retaliation. We call that the Fetterman Massacre. So, we're looking at both sides. Now, not everybody gets away with massacres, so if we go back to the Sand Creek Massacre, here's Colonel Chivington's trial. He's going to be put up on charges. Here are his accusers that say that he is a bad dude. And I'm going to read this paragraph to you. This is the report that the committee gave basically to the judge, and it goes like this. As to Colonel Chivington, your committee can hardly find fitting terms to describe his conduct. Wearing the uniform of the United States, which should be the emblem of justice and humanity, holding the important position of the commander of a military district, and therefore having the honor of the government to that extent in his keeping, he deliberately planned and executed a foul and dastardly massacre. You don't get to use the word dastardly a lot. Dastardly massacre which would have disgraced the veriest savage amongst those who were the victims of his cruelty. Having full knowledge of their friendly character, having himself been instrumental to some extent in placing them in their position of fancied security, he took advantage of their inapprehension and defenseless condition to gratify the worst passions that ever cursed the heart of a man. And it goes on and says, Chivington, you're out. So, not everybody's getting away with these massacres. All right, if we go up to let's see, the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, and the federal government in the treaty is going to give the Sioux Nation and other smaller tribes a pretty large swath of land. Now you can kind of see here on the map, and then there's a map of the United States. You can kind of see how that's a big old chunk of land. And so you're talking about South Dakota, North Dakota, and Wyoming, and Montana, and Idaho, and Colorado, and a big chunk. The Treaty of Fort Laramie. The U.S. government promised in this treaty to abandon the trail of the Bozeman Trail, which goes from Fort Laramie to Virginia City, Fort Laramie, Wyoming. I got it somewhere. Can you see that dot? Through Wyoming, up to Montana, and over to Virginia City, right there. That the U.S. government said, all right, we're not going to use that. We're not going to go through your lands, and everything is going to be cool. And as soon as everybody was signed, all the little bitty tribes and the Sioux signed the treaty, and everything was great, and everything was hunky-dory. And then the Ponca Indians showed up, and they weren't invited to the signature meeting. And then the Sioux Indians said, "Oh no, you're not. You're out." And then they declared war on the Ponca, and then the United States, the Ponca complained to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government said, yeah, well, technically, you're not part of the treaty, so you have to get out. And so we've got a place for you. We're going to send you to Indian territory. And they moved the Poncas to Indian territory. And this was like, why would anybody go to Indian territory? I mean, seriously, because this was way before Frontier City was, and Whitewater Bay and Quail Springs Mall existed. So why would anybody come to Indian territory? I guess they were really like sooner. No. Oh, no, we'll get to that later. Okay, and so this treaty was fantastic, and it was great, signed in 1868, and then 8 years later, it's all going to fall apart with the Battle of Little Bighorn, which we'll get to in a slide or two. Please note, once the government came in and took the territory from the Sioux, why would they do that? Oh, because gold was discovered in the Black Hills, but so so they took the U.S. government took the money from they took the gold. They took the land from the Sioux. In 1980, so 1980, the Sioux tribe members sued the U.S. government for violation of the treaty of 1868. And went to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court of the United States, in the Supreme Court case, United States versus Sioux Nation of Indians, the Supreme Court ruled for the Sioux Nation and said, yeah, the U.S. government owes you money for taking your land, for violating the treaty. And if you add interest in, the U.S. government owes the Sioux Nation over $1 billion. $1 billion. That's a lot of money. And here's what the Sioux tribe did. We don't want the money. It was $1 billion. We don't want the money. We want the land back. Ooh, somebody's calling me. I wonder if it's somebody important. Oh, spam risk. Oh, no, thank you. So $1 billion, and the Sioux have. Here we are in the year 2021, and they have still refused the money, and because they want the land back. And let's see. I mean, that land right there. What's in that land? Well, there's Mount Rushmore. The Battle of Little Bighorn, 1876. So right here we have General, well, at this point he's Colonel George Armstrong Custer. And then he's posing next to Alexei Alexandrovich from the Russian, let's see, at that point it was Russia. And those of you who know, well, no, actually, yeah. So Alexei Alexandrovich, he was with the son of Alexander, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he was a prince of Russia. And so they were out there shooting buffalo. I just found that an interesting picture of these two guys. George Custer is going to be charged with going out there and smacking around some of the Sioux. So we have Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, both chiefs of the Sioux. Sitting Bull is the older gentleman, and he's going to have a vision. He's going to have a dream that says the white men are going to come and kill everybody. And well, there you go. So here comes George Armstrong Custer with his subordinates, Major Reno and Captain Benteen, and they're going to approach the Sioux and ask them to leave nicely, and then of course that's not going to happen. And so George Armstrong Custer, his scouts are going to tell him, well, there's only 150 Sioux warriors in the camp. So, and you've got 700, so 700 versus 150, I mean, so you just go in there and smack them around a little bit. And Custer's like, yes, excellent. Well, when they find out, as they get really, really close, and they find out, oh, wait, that's a much bigger camp than 150 Indians, that looks like more like, I don't know, 1,500, maybe 2,000 Indians. That's a lot different. 700 versus 2,000 is a lot different. And so most people probably would have said, all right, we're going to turn around and go back and go with plan B. But Custer did not. He broke his groups up into thirds. So he split his groups. And Reno charged up one side, and the Cheyenne. Nope, the Sioux were ready for them, which that was bad news. And so then Reno had to retreat, and then Benteen saved Reno. And meanwhile, Custer's on the other side, and his group, not so much. So they ended up defending a small hill called the Last Stand Hill, what we call it today, the Last Stand Hill. And the reason they call it the Last Stand Hill is because, well, it was Custer's last stand. And we would love to have lots and lots of evidence about primary source documents from the U.S. troops there to tell us what happened on the hill, but they all died, so we don't have any record of what happened other than the Native Americans' version of the story, and many of their stories corroborate, saying that Crazy Horse led a charge up the hill and basically yeah, Custer and all of his men died. 250 American casualties to only 50 Indian casualties, so a 5-to-1 ratio for the Native Americans. Now, what's the big deal here is that yes, the Native Americans win this, but it's a Pyrrhic victory because they won, but they're going to lose ultimately because now they're not. The U.S. government's not going to send out the scrubs. They're not going to send out, oh hey, Custer, go out there. No, they're going to send out the army, like the army, and it's pretty much at this point it's going to be done for the Native Americans. Side note here is that Elizabeth Bacon Custer, George Custer's widow, is going to argue that her husband is an American hero. Ben Franklin, Andrew Jackson. I don't know why I chose Andrew Jackson. George Armstrong Custer. And so she lobbied for him, and in the 1890s, the 1900s, 1910, 1920s, people were like, yes, Custer, and he fought bravely against the Native Americans, and he died a hero. And then in the 1960s, 1970s, people started to go, wait a second, Custer was actually, he was kind of an idiot because, he went up against an overwhelming, and why are we celebrating him as a hero? So history changes with interpretation over time. Note. All right. Oh, the buffalo. Good times. So at the end of the Civil War, there were, a million, is that what it says? I can't read on the little screen. I could turn around, but I'm going to be impressive and not look at the screen. So there were 1 million bison, on the plains of the United States after the Civil War. And then not too terribly long after that, I'm going to have to look around. I have to go see a date. By 1885, there were only about 1,000 bison left, and most of them in Yellowstone Park. Now, why is that? Because once we had the train, the transcontinental railroad that came through, and the whites are able to come out here to the plains pretty easy, and they can come out here and shoot all the buffalo they want. And who's going to stop them? Plus, as a bonus, if you shoot all the buffalo, then what do the Plains Indians get to live on? So, hey, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? Get rid of the food source for the... Ooh, yeah, that's kind of yucky. Ugh. Hey, good news for all of you bison fans out there. I just looked it up, and in the year 2021, well, I guess the latest buffalo census, I don't know how often they do that, we are back up to 500,000 buffalo in the United States, with 5,000 of them in Yellowstone. You too can go see buffalo just down in Lawton if you want to take the quick hour-and-a-half drive down to Lawton, and you can go drive right up to a fairly good size buffalo. They've got some herds down there, down at the Wichita Mountains. All right. The Indian Wars are coming to an end. So we have pockets of resistance with the Native Americans. One pretty good-sized pocket was the Apaches, the Comanches, down in the southwest area, so Texas and New Mexico, Arizona. The U.S. government sent a large contingent of troops down there to quell the Native American uprisings. And in fact, the Native Americans crossed the border into Mexico to go hide in the Sierra Madres. And the U.S. government asked the Mexican government, "Hey, can we come in and pursue these evil Indians?" And the Mexican government was like, "Yeah, come on, come get these guys." So ultimately, they are going to catch the vast majority of the Apaches, Comanches, and they're going to put them on the reservations. The hero of the story here for the Apaches is Geronimo. Geronimo. And so Geronimo is going to he's going to hold out for a couple of years, longer than the rest of his tribe. He's going to play hide and seek with the U.S. with the U.S. Army, and then ultimately he's going to be captured through some negotiations that went south with regard to who was lying to who. But regardless about that, is that after he was captured, Geronimo became pretty famous. He was always he was locked up in chains and fettered. His feet were chained together. They were fettered, but he was put on tour around the United States. He went to a presidential inauguration parade, and he went all over the country. People were like, "Hey, look, it's the famous Apache Indian chief Geronimo." Please note, he wasn't actually a chief. But they would dress him up, the U.S. government would dress him up in big, stereotypical chief Indian garb and parade him in front of people. So a couple stories about this. One, Geronimo actually made some money. Now, he was a prisoner, but he made some money on this because the anecdotal story says that he was on a train going from point A to point B, and somebody asked him if they could have a button from his coat. So he was like, okay. So he took a button off and gave it to the guy. And now this guy he's got a button from the coat of the famous Apache Native American chief. He wasn't a chief, Geronimo. And so Geronimo, so another person came up and said, "Hey, can I have another button? And can I have another button?" And so when they got to the next stop, Geronimo went in, or they got some more buttons from the general store, and he sewed more buttons on. And then people were like, "Oh, hey, I hear you're letting us take your buttons." And then Geronimo was like, "Yeah, you can have this button for like $1." And so see how that works? And so then he would sell his buttons from his coat, and then he would, at the next stop, he would then go buy more buttons and then sew them on, and then he would sell them, and so he made money. He also did that with his hats. Somebody came up and said, "I don't want a button, I want your hat." So he goes, "Okay, here's for $5, here's my hat," or whatever it was. And then at the next stop, he'd buy a new hat, and then he'd put it on his head, and people were like, "Oh, can I have your hat?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure, for $5. And so Geronimo made quite a bit of money selling clothes that he only wore for 30 seconds or whatever. But there you go. Some of you entrepreneurs out there are sitting here thinking, maybe, I wonder how much my hat would be worth. Nah. I looked really hard for the cartoon where the guys are in the plane and the first guy jumps out and goes, "Geronimo!" And the second guy gets on the plane and goes, "Geronimo!" And then Geronimo jumps out of the plane and goes, "Me!" That's right, I'll be here all night. So there's Geronimo. Okay, the Battle of Wounded Knee. So the Battle of Wounded Knee, again, we're talking about the Sioux Indians. And the Sioux Indians, they had a fad going, type of dance, kind of like, when the Macarena came out, or I was going to try to come up with a name for a K-pop dance, but all you K-pop people in there, you know what I'm talking about. I can't come up with one. But anyway, a fad dance. And so the cool dance of the time period was called the ghost dance. So a bunch of Sioux Indians got together and decided to do a ghost dance. I was about to say hip-hop party, but they had a party which violated their parole with regard to how many Native Americans could be in one area at one time. So the U.S. troops came out, and they were kind of watching them. The U.S. troops noted that there were lots of Sioux Indians who were kind of standing around. The people at the prom who kind of, not that we've had a prom in a couple of years, but the people at the prom who stand against the wall and they don't actually dance. Well, there were some Sioux Indians who were around who had guns, and so the troops came around. The U.S. troops came around, and they were taking these the guns, just kind of putting them in a pile, going, we're just here to make sure everybody's cool, and they're taking their guns. And the story says that one of the Sioux Indians was deaf, and when the troops came up and said, "Hey, can we have your gun?" he didn't know what was going on. And whether, one story says that they wrestled him for the gun, and another one says that they dropped their guns and pointed at him. And regardless, a gunshot went off, and as soon as one gun went off, then suddenly there were a whole bunch of guns went off, and unfortunately, a lot of Native Americans died. Do I have a number? Between 250 and 300 Native Americans died who were attending the dance. So that was bad. In 1990, both houses of government, the Senate and the House, passed a joint resolution condemning those soldiers, and they passed a resolution expressing deep regret for that incident. Okay, a couple more slides, and we're going to be done with this this video, video one of this week. The Symmetry Act of 1887. So, the Native Americans, they have these fairly large reservations that were designated to them by the treaties. For example, the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, the Treaty of New Eshota, etc., etc. And so, big areas, big swaths of land. The U.S. government looked at that and said, you know, that's a whole bunch of land for not very many Native Americans. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this land and we're going to divide it up into square miles, into 640 acres each. And then we're going to assign a plot of land to every Native American in the tribe. So if there's 500 Native Americans in this tribe, they get 500 plots, 500 of the 640 acres each. Now, what do you do with the rest of the land that the Native Americans aren't going to get? Well, now the U.S. government has extra land out there that they can then sell to the highest bidder, and or other ways to move in whites into the Great Plains. So this is called the Symmetry Act, and this did not go well with the Native Americans. But what are they going to do? Because the U.S. government, the Army, is behind this, right? So what can they do? Originally, the 5 civilized tribes, can you name them? Can you name the 5 civilized tribes? Can you name them? Ready, go. Did you forget Creek? You forgot Creek, didn't you? Chickasaw. Did you forget Chickasaw? Chickasaw, Creek, Choctaw, Cherokee, and Seminole. Good for you. Originally, they were not part of the Dawes Act, and so, hey, good for them. They didn't have to follow the rules. Oh, and then 9 years later, the Curtis Act in 1896 said, hey, by the way, 5 civilized tribes, you too have to have your reservation divided up into allotments. Okay, and then of course the argument is that the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek and or the Treaty of New Eshota and or the other treaties, they said in their language, they said the Native Americans get this land in perpetuity, forever. And that clearly violated the treaty. But, yeah, the guy with the biggest guns. This is going to allow, again, white settlers to come in through various ways. We'll talk about that a little bit. Here's our last slide for this section, for this first part of the video. So now that the Native Americans are parceled into their allotted lands, their little bitty 640 acre groupings, just like the white settlers have been doing. Now, what is the U.S. government going to do? Well, here's a plan to get rid of the Native Americans. We've got them segregated off into their small sections, but they're still talking Native American talk, and they're still dressing Native American dress, and they're still doing Native American stuffs. I know, how discriminatory, right? So the U.S. government says, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take the children, the Native American children, and we're going to put them into white schools, or white-esque schools. We're going to put them into Indian schools, but we're going to teach them to be white kids. So here we have a famous picture of the Native American pre and the Native American post. It's the same guy, and you see that when these kids walk in the door, they cut the Native American hair, they put it into a white hairstyle. They give them a white name, so instead of Red Cloud, they say your name is Billy, etc., etc. They punish the kids if the kids. I'm specifically talking about the Carlisle Indian Industrial School up in Pennsylvania. They punish the kids if the kid exhibits any Native American behavior. Corporal punishment, that's swats and or other things. So pretty crazy idea. It says one of the mottos for the Carlisle School was "Kill the Indian, save the child." It was also known as the Apple Plan. Wow, here you go. Ready? The Apple Plan. Oh, right. Apples are red on the outside, but they're white on the inside. Yeah, think that all the way through. I can't even make stuff up like that. That's crazy. The Apple Plan, they're red on the outside, but they're white on the inside. So you teach the Native American kids how to speak English and how to dress English and how to eat English foods and how to act like apples. The Carlisle School went for 40 years. It was disbanded in 1918. I wonder why. What was going on in 1918? Do you know? 1918? What was going on? I'm sure we'll get to that later. According to Wikipedia, there were 10,000, over the 40 years, there were 10,000 schools, there were 10,000 students that were enrolled in the Carlisle School, and only 158 graduated. 158 students out of 10,000 graduated. I mean, that's actually a lower percentage than our high school. Okay. I mean, it is a lower percentage than our high school, but 26 other Bureau of Indian schools opened that kind of did the same thing. As our final quick story of this video, Jim Thorpe. Does anybody know Jim Thorpe? Jim Thorpe, he's going to be, I don't know if he actually graduated from Carlisle, but he went to Carlisle. Now he's probably their most famous kid that came out of that. Jim Thorpe is wow, when you talk about athletes, I mean, the reason we call it the Jim Thorpe Award, he was a football player, a basketball player, I'm sure he played baseball, he ran track in the Olympics, he did it all. And this is one of the more famous pictures of Jim Thorpe here. And what's great about this picture, he's in the Olympics and he's about to run track, and he's so fast compared to the other guys that they tried to sabotage him, and they took his shoes before a race. They literally took his shoes from him. And so the story says that he went to the trash and he went through and he found 2 pairs of shoes, mismatched shoes, and he put them on and they didn't fit so well, but you know, they are what they are, and he ran the race and still won. And you can see, if you've got good eyes, you can see his mismatched shoes. Man, that guy's fast when you're running in shoes that aren't even your own shoes. Okay, that is the end of this video 1. Our next video, cowboys and Indians and gold and stuff. So I'll see you in a little bit. Be good.